Now we're going to talk about in Chapter 5, Section 3 about reference angles. So this is another big thing that comes up and can be very useful, just like coterminals and cofunctions and knowing those uh, special angles. So reference angle is big, especially when when we look into sine, cosine, and tangent of 30, 45, and 60, and 90 degrees. Because really all we have to do is just wherever we're at, once we get past those ones and we look at, say, 120, well, we can use reference angles in order to find what sine of 120 is. So a reference angle is just an angle that is used in order, an angle that is bigger than 90. Well, actually, a reference angle is actually an acute angle, and it's written as an angle prime. So that little dash here is prime, so theta prime. So it is a positive acute angle. So it's always positive and acute, meaning less than 90. Okay, and so we always look at the terminal side. So if we're looking at an angle, we look at the terminal side where it ends. Okay, and then we reference from there, from where it ends, we always reference it to the x-axis. Okay, and we find out what is that distance from where our angle ends to the x-axis, which is 180 degrees. And so if we're in the second quadrant here, quadrant 2, like this one, then we take 180 and we subtract our angle, whatever it is, and that will give us this theta prime, our reference angle. Okay, and it's always going to be an acute angle. If it's in quadrant 3, if our terminal side ends in quadrant 3, like this one, we reference it back to the x-axis because it's always an acute angle. So I reference it back here. So that would be, if it's in quadrant 3, I'm going to still use 180, but this time I'm going to take my angle and subtract 180. You could still do it the same way as this first one, but just know it's always positive, right? So just take the absolute value of that, and that's going to give us our theta prime, our reference angle. Okay, if it's in the fourth quadrant, like this one, if it's in the fourth quadrant, then I'm going to reference it to this x-axis right here. So this angle might originally open up to here, say 330. Okay, so I'm going to reference it back to this line right here, which is 360. Right, so I'm going to take, in quadrant 4, I'm going to take 360 and I'm going to subtract my angle. Okay, and then that will give me my reference angle. All right, if it's in the first quadrant, which I didn't put up here, but if it's in the first quadrant, then it is that angle. Then the reference angle, I'd reference it back here, and the angle is the reference angle. Okay, now if it circles all the way around and keeps circling, like you say you have 750, so you have this angle 750, okay, and you're asked to reference that. What's the reference angle for that? Well, then once it's bigger than 360, I just keep on subtracting 360, okay, until I get a number between 0 and 360, and then I can reference that either to 180 or to 360. So like this one, if I minus 360, I still get I get 330, or not 330. Sorry. So that's 390. Oops. 390. And so that still is bigger than 360. So then I need to minus another 360. And I get 30. And now I can reference this. This is now in the first quadrant. Since it's in the first quadrant, that is my reference angle, 30 degrees. Okay. So let's look at these two examples. We have 200 and that's a 10. 210 degrees. So 210 degrees, this is 90, this is 180, this is 270, so 210 would be somewhere in here, right? So that means I'm going to reference it back to 180. Okay, so I could take 210 and minus 180, or I can take 180 and minus 210. this one's negative 30, right? This one's a positive 30. If you do it this way, just know that, just make that positive, okay? And so our reference angle is 30 degrees. So then I would look at my chart from the video we did last time and say, okay, what is sine of 30, cosine of 30, or tangent of 30? And that would be the same answer. So sine of 30 would be the same answer as sine of 210. But this one, because we're in the bottom half down here, sine is negative, so this would be a negative. Okay. So if we do sine, it'd be 1/2, right? So this would be sine of 210 would just be negative 1/2. All right, so to do 1387, so 1387, so we can continually subtract 360s, okay? Or we can kind of do what we did with the coterminal kind of thing, is you can figure out, okay, take this number and divide it by 360. So we divide that by 360 and we get 3.85. So there's two ways that you could do this. You could round that up and then times that by 360, or you can take 3, round it down and take 3 times 360 and then subtract that from 1387. So we'll go ahead and we'll do the 3. So 3 times 360 is 1080. And then I'm going to take the 1387 and subtract that. And then I get 307. Is that correct? 307. Okay, so 307, that would be the angle kind of that we're looking at, right? And then what I want to do, now that's the same angle, so maybe this is too much for you, I don't know. So this angle of 1387 degrees is the same look of 307 degrees, right? So now I can use this one, 307, and it is in the 4th quadrant, right, somewhere down here, because this is 270, this is 360, so it's somewhere over here, okay, 307. Now I'm going to reference that back to here, so I want to reference that back to 360. So I'm going to take 360 and I'm going to subtract 307, so I get 3, so 53. So 53 degrees would be the reference angle, and so that's how you find that one. So it's a little more complicated. You continually subtract 360, or you can just continually subtract 360 until you get to a number between 0 and 360, and then use that to find your reference angle. Okay, so basically you found a coterminal, right? These are coterminals, and then use that coterminal to find your reference angle. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice a couple on this one. Okay, so here's one. We want to find the trig function, so all the trig functions, sine, cosine, tangent, and the reciprocals of this angle 210. It's in quadrant 3. Okay, so we want to use reference angles. So 210, right, this is 180, this is 270, so 210 is somewhere right here. We already found this one, right? We reference it back to the x-axis, and it's always in a positive acute angle. So we can take 180 and minus from the angle, we get 30 degrees. Now we can use our sine of 30, cosine of 30, tan of 30. All right, we found these answers before. That was in the last video. Okay, and then what quadrant we're in? So we can do cast, or we can do all students take calculus. Okay, excuse me. So, right, these are the positive, where the positive ones are. All meaning all 6 trig functions are positive. S meaning sine is positive. T meaning tangent is positive, and C meaning cosine is positive, and their reciprocals. Right, so just the positive ones. So we're in the 3rd quadrant, so that means only tangent and cotangent are positive. So these two will be negative. Okay, and then they can find the reciprocals of those. So that means we can use these two will have the same answer, except for based on which quadrant we're in, right? So normally sine of 30 is 1/2, cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2, and tangent of 30 is root 3 over 3. Okay, so we're going to have those answers 1/2 root 3 over 2 and root 3 over 3 and their reciprocals. But since we're in 210, that's where it just becomes negative 1/2, where cosine of 2/10 becomes negative root 3 over 2, where tangent stays positive because we're in the third quadrant. And then the reciprocals would be cosecant of 210 would equal negative 2. Secant of 210 would equal negative 2 root 3 over 3. And cotangent would equal root 3. So those are all the 6 of them for you. So that's kind of how you can use your reference angle. We can go ahead and practice a couple more. So here's another one. We want to do negative 240, so negative means it opens down, right? So that means we're opening this way. So this would be negative 90, this would be negative 180, this would be negative 270. So we're at negative 240, so that's somewhere over here. So we're at negative 240. And we're going to reference it back to the x-axis. So how do I go back? How much do I need to go add to get to negative 180? So you don't have to think about those negatives at all. You can just take 240 and subtract 180. Right, because I'm bringing it back to 180. So that is 60. So really I'm going to look at cosine of 60 degrees. And cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2. But I'm in the second quadrant, so what's cosine? All students take calculus or cast. S stands for sine, so only sine is positive, and cosecant, the reciprocal of sine, is positive. So that means cosine will be negative. So cosine of negative 240 will be negative 1/2. Because you're in the second quadrant. Not because this is negative 240, it's because you're in the second quadrant, and that makes cosine negative in the second quadrant. So there's your answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice these problems on page 508. Well, really it's probably page 510. So actually page 510. So you can do these and then you come back if you need to watch these videos. Or you can just watch them whatever you want to do. Okay, so number 59 here, we're looking at using reference angles. So on number 59, we're asked to use this reference angle to find, match the reference angle. So 59 is matching the reference angle, so what goes to 98? So we look at 98. 98 is right over here in the second quadrant, so how much can I get to get back to 180? So 180 minus 98. So that's 2 would be 100, and so 82 degrees. So that is C. Or you can just put 82 degrees, right? So that's C, that goes column 2 is C. Okay, so number 63. So looking at number 63, we're trying to find 750. So that's bigger than 360, so let's subtract 360 from it. So 360 minus that is 390. And 390 minus another 360, because it's bigger than 360, is 30 degrees. So we're looking at 30 degrees. So 63 is 30 degrees, which is D. Okay, now let's look at number 73. So number 73 on page 511 is looking at 300 degrees, and it wants to find the 6 trig functions. So it's looking at 300 degrees. We want to find the reference angle. 300 degrees is right here, because this is 270, this is 360, so 300 must be here. So reference it back here. How much more do I need to add to 300 to get to 360? That'd be 60 degrees. So we're going to use our chart and look at 60 degrees and find all 6 trig functions. We found cosine from our example. Right, cosine of 60 was 1/2. So sine of 60 must be the root 3 over 2. And then tangent is just plain root 3. of 60. And then they're reciprocals, right? And then since we're in the fourth quadrant down here, that means that C, cosine, is the only one that's positive. So this will be positive and it's reciprocal. All the rest will be negative. So when I look at sine of 300, I get the same answer as sine of 60, root 3 over 2, but since I'm in that fourth quadrant, my answer is negative. Cosine of 300 is the same answer as cosine of 60, and since we're in the fourth quadrant, it's also positive, so it's actually the exact same answer. And then tangent, because we're in the fourth quadrant, it's going to be negative. And then we can do the reciprocals. Cosecant would be flipping that. You'd get negative 2 root 3 over 3. That one's kind of the more difficult one. When you flip the root 3 over 2, you flip the fraction, then you have to rationalize it, right? So you have to flip it, and then rationalize. And so that's where you get the 2 root 3 over 3 over here. Okay, secant's pretty easy. You just flip 1/2, so you get 2. Tangent, it's also a little, or cotangent, sorry. And I'm not putting the angle in here. I'm supposed to put the angle in there. All right. So cosecant of 300 equals negative root 3 over 2. Secant of 300 equals 2. And cotangent of 300 equals a negative root 3 over 3. Which again, it's taking that and dividing, flipping the fraction, and then rationalizing it. And that's where you get the root 3 over 3. Okay, so those are all those for number 73. Now we can do number 91. And number 91 is a little bit bigger, right? Just finding the exact value. So exact value means you don't use a calculator. You use your reference angle, and you use the fact of your table of 30, 60, 45, and use that to find what the exact value is. The exact value means you don't have a decimal as an answer. You leave it as root 3 over 2 or 1/2 or root 2 over 2, those certain things. Okay, so since we're bigger than 360, that means we can continually subtract 360. We're going to subtract it 3 times, because basically what I'm going to do is divide this by 360. And I probably get 3 point something. So I'm going to times 3 by 360, and that's 1080. And then I'm going to take the 1305, and I'm going to subtract 1080. And so there, 25 would be, so 225. So we get 225. So really, sine of 1305 is going to be sine of the same thing as sine of 225. They're coterminals, right? They end in the same spot. 225 would end, here's 180, here's 270, so it's going to end right here. So I want to reference it back to 180. So I want to take 225 and subtract 180, and I get 45 degrees. So I'm going to look at my 45-degree chart of sine, and sine of 45 is root 2 over 2. And then, because I'm in the third quadrant, only tangent and cotangent are positive, so that means sine is negative. So that means sine of 225 is negative root 2 over 2. But these are coterminals, right? These are coterminals, so that means sine, sine of 1,305 is negative root 2 over 2. So there's our answer for that. Let's go ahead and do number 93. Number 93, cosine negative 510. And here again, we're above 360, even though we're going negative, right? So we're going negative, that means we're dropping down this way, so we go around 360. And then we want to figure out, okay, how much past 360 we're going. So instead of subtracting 360 like on the last time, we want to take negative 510 and go ahead and add 360. So we add 360 to that, which is 150. So we get 150, and it's negative 150, right? So that passes 360 here and then goes negative 150. Well, this is going to be negative 90, negative 180. So here's negative 90, negative 150 is right here. So even though our angle opens up all the way, here is negative 510 right here. Well, that's the same as just going from right here, negative 150, right? So at negative 150, I want to reference it back, because I'm in the third quadrant, to 180. So really, I can just ask myself, I could just, who cares about the negatives, just take 180 and minus 150. And then you get 30 degrees. So you're just looking at a 30-degree angle now. So what's cosine of 30? Well, cosine of 30 from our chart is root 3 over 2. But since I'm in the third quadrant, only tangent is positive. So that means this cosine of negative 510 is going to be negative root 3 over 2. Okay, so that's how you can use the reference angle and those special angles that we did from the last video.